A quorum being present, the Committee on Education and the Workforce will come to order. Before we turn our attention to this morning's hearing, I would like to take care of an administrative matter. At the committee's January 21st meeting, we welcomed our new members to the committee. Today, both the Republicans and Democrats have completed assigning members to the subcommittees. I ask unanimous consent on behalf of myself and Mr. Scott, the committee's ranking members, submit those assignments for the record. We'll give you every opportunity. Without objection, the subcommittee assignments are made. Turning to our hearing, Governor Pence is with us. He'll be joining here in just a moment. But I'd like to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to recognize myself for my opening comments. Well, welcome to witnesses and guests. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our former colleague, Indiana Governor Mike Pence, who I just mentioned will be joining us shortly. Last week, we were reminded once again of the persistent challenges facing the American people. The Department of Commerce reported that the economy grew a meager 2.6% in the last quarter of 2014. According to the Wall Street Journal, we have now experienced 9 straight years of growth below 3%. This anemic economy is hurting families across the country. It's hurting nearly 9 million workers who remain unemployed. It's hurting more than 6 million workers who need full-time jobs but can only find part-time work. It's hurting moms and dads trying to pay the bills and put food on the table with smaller paychecks. As workplaces continue to struggle, so do the nation's schools. 1 out of 5 students will drop out of high school before receiving a diploma. Making matters worse, far too many students graduate without the knowledge and skills they need to pursue higher education or compete in the workforce. Meanwhile, college costs continue to soar, and graduates are leaving college with too much debt and too few job prospects. These are tough problems that have been around for years, and unfortunately, the President's policies are making them worse. The administration continues to pursue new rules and regulations that jeopardize employee rights, stymie growth, and make it harder for employers to raise wages and create new jobs. A convoluted waiver system is creating more confusion and uncertainty in K-12 schools, and flawed regulatory schemes will deny students access to the college or university of their choice. And just this week, the President put forward a budget proposal that calls for more spending, more taxes, more borrowing to create new government programs. Middle-class families are being squeezed, and a larger federal presence in classrooms and workplaces is not the answer. The President wants us to double down on the failed policies of the last 6 years. The American people deserve better. We need to do better. We must provide employers certainty and flexibility so they can grow their businesses, create new jobs, and give workers the raise they've earned. We must help more students pursue the dream of a college degree without living in a nightmare of debt and unemployment. We must advance K-12 education reform that empowers parents and places more control in the hands of teachers and local decision makers. We must modernize our pension system and hold the administration accountable for policies that make it harder for individuals to succeed in school and the workplace. The American people are desperate to move the country in a new direction. They are not willing to accept slow growth and stagnant wages as the new normal. They deserve bold solutions that will lead to a strong, vibrant economy, more good-paying jobs, and higher incomes for working families. These are the priorities shared by most Americans, and they must be our priorities as well. In the coming months, we intend to advance responsible reforms that will help make a difference in the lives of students, employers, teachers, and working families. We have an excellent panel of witnesses to tell us what's working and what isn't, and to help inform our efforts moving forward. Again, I want to thank our witnesses for joining us and look forward to our discussion. Before I recognize Ranking Member Scott, I'd like to take just a brief moment to say a few words about one member who is unable to join us today. Congressman Phil Rowe recently learned that a member of his family is battling a serious illness and is taking some time to support his family. I ask my colleagues to please lift up your prayers to Phil and the entire Rowe family. With that, I will now recognize the committee's ranking member, my colleague, Bobby Scott, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and our thoughts and prayers are with our colleague, Mr. Rowe, and wish his family well. Good morning, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here for the first full committee hearing of the 114th Congress, especially our former member from Indiana. Today's hearing allows us to hear testimony from a distinguished panel about steps that states and institutions of higher education and business are taking to improve the well-being of students, families, and workers in our country, and I look forward to learning more from our witnesses. Mr. Chairman, I would point out that I had hoped that our first hearing would be to consider testimony on legislation that was introduced yesterday, H.R. 5, which would reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. I'm disappointed that the majority has chosen to move forward on the reauthorization without holding a single hearing. Hearings provide the public with the opportunity to explore the research and evidence that is critical to making evidence-based policy decisions. When it comes to improving the academic achievement of our children, we need the best research to help form the basis for any reauthorization. Failure to seek input from experts and various stakeholders and embarking on an expedited process is a disservice to the 50-year bipartisan history of ESEA, and more importantly, a disservice to our nation's children. So tomorrow, we will be holding a forum on ESEA to which all members of the committee are invited. This forum will serve as one opportunity to explore what works to improve education. But on the issue of the opportunity for students and our workers, our country has come a long way since the depths of the Great Recession. Unemployment has dropped to 5.6, its lowest rate since 2008. The private sector has experienced a record 58 consecutive months of job growth. In each of the past 11 months, the economy has added over 200,000 private sector jobs, a growth rate not seen since the 1990s. But success in the labor market has yet to translate into higher wages for the majority of workers, and the gap between the haves and have-not continues to extend. This chart points out that wages for the top 1% since 1979 have grown over 138%, while the bottom 90% just grew 15%. And for the income for the top 1% rose from $871,000 in 2009 to $968,000 in the course of just the last year. But for the remaining 99%, the income rate has actually declined over the same period. This next chart gives a better idea of what's happened to the middle-class wages from 1979 to 2013. Middle-class wages have grown a mere 6%, while low-wage workers actually declined 5%. Congress must ensure that all workers see our economy's improvement reflected in their paychecks. This includes raising the national minimum wage, increasing overtime pay protections, and strengthening workers' ability to collectively bargain on their behalf. We also must continue to expand the bipartisan achievements of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act to promote and develop skills which lead to in-demand, higher-paying jobs. However, investment in our country's workforce must start early. The success of our children directly relates to the long-term health of our workforce and our economy. In fact, a study just released by the Washington Center for Equitable Growth shows that improving our educational performance could substantially increase our gross domestic product over the next 35 years. Only through continued investment in high-quality education and through working to reduce inequality in our educational system can our country continue to thrive. We must make sure that all students are receiving an education that prepares them for college or career. And we must also improve access to higher education. Research from the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce shows that by 2018, we will need 22 million new college degrees, and at the rate we're going, we're going to fall short by 3 million. A college education is important not only for our economy, but also for students' future wages. College graduates earn an average of $46,000 a year, where those with only a high school diploma earn less than half of that. The cost of pursuing a college degree has become even more daunting. Skyrocketing college costs have forced students and families to incur greater and greater loan debt. 7 in 10 graduating seniors in 2013 had to borrow money averaging $28,000 or more. Student debt now stands at over $1.2 trillion and is certainly a drag on our economic growth. I hope the committee can find areas of common ground to address these challenges, and I look forward to hearing from witnesses on how we can expand opportunity for students and our workers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7C, all members will be permitted to submit written statements to be included in the permanent hearing record. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. And I know Governor Pence has heard that phrase 1,000 times. It seems a little strange to have you down there instead of up here. But to that end, we're going to move to introducing our distinguished witnesses, and I will start by recognizing Mr. Rokita, followed by Mr. Messer, to introduce their governor. Mr. Rokita.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the privilege of introducing our good friend and one of Indiana's favorite sons, a true leader, Mike Pence. Many of us have worked with Governor Pence here in the House, and we're pleased to see his public service continue. He's a cutting-edge policymaker. He's a solution-oriented leader. And perhaps most obvious to many of us, he serves with a servant's heart in all versions of that definition. Governor Pence deserves a great deal of credit for fostering education and economic opportunity in our great state. And, Mr. Chairman, I'll simply let him tell us more about that. It's an honor to have you here with us today, Governor. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Rokita. It is my honor to be able to introduce a proud son of Indiana's 6th Congressional District, my friend. I'm proud to call Mike Pence my governor, but I'm even prouder to call him my friend. He's, as you'll learn today, an incredible innovator in the area of education, somebody who's expanding vocational opportunities in our state, somebody who's a great champion for school choice initiatives in our state, somebody who understands that we cannot rest as a nation until every child in America has an opportunity to go to a great school, and understands the simple principle that no child in America should have a wait list to their future. Thank you for being here today, Governor. We're proud to have you.
I thank the gentleman. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Wilson to introduce our second witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is really a special day for the Wilson family. My wife is going to be here in a minute because two of her favorite people on earth are sitting up front, Mike Pence and Provost Michael Amritas. So they'll, and I could, it's hard, hey, she loves to see Chairman Klein, but this is much better. So, no, this is good. But as a grateful graduate of the University of South Carolina myself, I really appreciate Dr. Michael Amritas being here today, his service to the University of South Carolina, its students, as Provost and Executive Vice President of Academic Affairs. Dr. Amritas has been an integral part of the University of South Carolina since 1994, when he started as an assistant professor. He has served as provost since 2009. As a continuing professor of chemical engineering, Dr. Amritas has taught several courses in kinetics, reactor design, and catalysis, and has received numerous college and university awards recognizing his teaching ability and research efforts. Though the University of South Carolina will surely miss him, we wish him well in his future endeavors as the new Chancellor of the University of Illinois at Chicago beginning next month. Godspeed, Dr. Amritas. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Now it's my turn to introduce the next two witnesses. Dr. Lawrence Michel is the president of the Economic Policy Institute, EPI. During his time at EPI, he has focused on U.S. living standards and labor markets. Prior to joining EPI, he held a number of research roles, was a faculty member at Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations, and was an economist for several unions, including the United Auto Workers, the United Steelworkers, AFSCME, and the Industrial Union Department of the AFL-CIO. Welcome. And Mr. Drew Greenblatt is President and CEO of Marlin Steel in Baltimore, Maryland, a company of 30 employees that manufactures materials handling baskets, sheet metal fabrications, wire forms, and machine products for aerospace, automotive, medical, pharmaceutical, industrial, and military applications. Mr. Greenblatt served on the board of the National Association of Manufacturers from September 2007 to September 2009 and is currently the chair of their Small Business Tax Policy Task Force. We have a new policy which I think has been explained to the witnesses that we have adopted across the committees in the House based on a Department of Justice recent ruling. And so I'm going to ask the witnesses to stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. And let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Before I recognize you to provide your testimony, let me briefly explain our lighting system. It's not all that innovative or unusual, so I don't think this will be too hard. You have 5 minutes to present your testimony. When you begin, the light in front of you will turn green. When 1 minute is left, the light will turn yellow. When your time has expired, the light will turn red. At that point, I will ask that you wrap up your remarks as best you are able. It's been a very long time since I've gavelled down a witness because they ran over, but please be aware that there are the 4 of you, and then we want the opportunity to ask questions. When it comes to member questions, I am much quicker to drop the gavel as I will try to hold my colleagues to their 5 minutes. So, Governor Pence, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Chairman Klein, and to Ranking Member Scott. Thank you for the invitation to come before you today and talk about what it is to be a part of a state that works, and particularly works for education. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to appear before all the distinguished members of this committee, many of whom I had the great privilege of serving with in the House of Representatives. And so let me thank all of you for the ongoing sacrifices that you personally and your families make as you serve the American people in this important time in the life of our nation. Obviously, I'm extremely grateful for the service and the leadership and the esteem of Congressman Rokita and Congressman Messer. Thank you for your kind comments. More importantly, thank you for your outstanding service to the people of Indiana and the people of our country. I've been in office as governor for a little over 2 years, and Mr. Chairman, I would say with the deepest respect to my former colleagues that I am persuaded, having spent 12 years in the Congress and 2 years as a governor, that the cure for what ails this country will come as much from our nation's state capitals as it ever will from our nation's capital. And I'm very grateful for the efforts of this Congress. Last Congress in the Workforce Investment Act, and as you move forward in reaffirming and restoring local control in education, that there is a clear recognition of that. In Indiana, in the category of education, we believe our state has the privilege of really being one of the leading innovators in education and expanding opportunity for all of our kids in this country. We're a state that's growing economically, more than 100,000 net new jobs since I took over. Unemployment's dropped from over 8% to now 5.8% in Indiana. But we realized early on in our state that if we can't succeed in the classroom, we won't succeed in the marketplace. And so Indiana's been driving education innovation, funding our traditional K-12 schools, promoting public charter school innovation. And also we are proud in the Hoosier State to be home now to the largest educational voucher program in the United States of America. In K-12 education, I'm pleased to report to you graduation rates are up. Test scores are up, and the state of Indiana recently ranked second in the nation in total growth on the nation's report card known as the NAEP. Our charter schools serve more than 35,000 students across the state of Indiana. And as I mentioned, our voucher program not only encompasses now some 30,000 students, but 4 out of 5 of our voucher students attend schools that are ranked A or B in the state's accountability system. In our current session of the General Assembly is underway, and we've reached a broad consensus that it will be an education session. And we've put forward a series of initiatives, the goal of which is to arrive at the fall of the year 2020 and have 100,000 more kids attending B or better schools in the state of Indiana. To accomplish that, we're calling for a significant increase in traditional K-12 funding, with a special emphasis on giving greater flexibility in our classrooms to pay good teachers more. As the chairman remembers, I've been married to a school teacher now for 30 years this year, and I learned a long time ago that good teachers make the difference. And I said recently to our General Assembly that if you want more good teachers, then pay good teachers more. We're going to work to do that in the state of Indiana. Give schools the flexibility to do that. We're also going to raise the foundation under our public charter program and lift the cap on our voucher program. But with most enthusiasm in our state, I believe centers not just around those initiatives, but I believe Indiana will be the first state in America to make career and vocational education a priority in every high school again. We've been working with unanimous bipartisan support in our General Assembly to both redesign career and technical education at the high school level in Indiana, and now in this session of our General Assembly, we'll be funding it. So my word is, as I watch the clock and know the chairman well enough to know the gavel is close, my word to all of you is a word of thanks for your leadership. I look forward to a dialogue today. But my request simply is, as Indiana's demonstrated, the kind of innovation that is benefiting our children, that's expanding educational choices both within our public systems as well as private school choice in our state, that as you go through the process of legislating this year, that you think resources, not red tape. I really do believe that to the extent that this Congress can give states like Indiana more freedom, more flexibility to innovate, our children, our states, and our people will be the beneficiaries. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Governor. Now I'd like to recognize Dr. Amaritas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of the committee. It is an honor and a privilege for me personally and for the University of South Carolina to appear in front of you today. The changes we have experienced in higher education in the last 5 years are unprecedented. It is not only the operational and funding models that are changing drastically, but it's also the expectations of the public, of our students and their parents that have shifted dramatically. Given this environment, some of my colleagues in academia are actually pessimistic about the future of our universities. In contrast, I believe that the best days for our public research universities are ahead of us. I believe that the public's demand for transparency and accountability gives us a wonderful vehicle to demonstrate the great success we have had in educating the sons and daughters of our country and preparing them for the workforce. I believe that the expectations of the students and parents for job skills and employability have motivated us to re-examine and modernize our programs, and I believe that the current environment is ideal for the establishment of public-private partnerships to support critical functions of our public universities, taking advantage of the experience and efficiency of the private sector. And yes, all of this can be achieved while we continue to increase efficiencies and control costs so that we remain accessible and affordable. There is no doubt that we will also continue to face significant challenges in higher education. Decreased funding both for instruction at the state level in many states and for research at the federal agency level has resulted in significant financial pressures on the operation of our universities. An increasingly larger fraction of the cost of undergraduate instruction has been passed to the students and their families through increases in tuition, creating a situation where we are pricing out, even from our public universities, a growing percentage of our high school graduates. At the same time, it has become more difficult for the research universities to sustain financially the efforts that have contributed to the world-leading position of our country in technology and creating an innovation deficit. Finally, due to a growing regulatory framework, both at the state and federal levels, the amount of time and effort needed to satisfy report requirements has grown exponentially with clear cost consequences for us. In this environment, there are going to be universities that thrive at the same time that others will struggle to maintain status quo. The difference will be the ability to come up and implement innovative ideas quickly, and I'm here today to offer a few examples of such innovative programs in South Carolina. Our Palmetto College provides the opportunity to place-bound South Carolinians to complete their undergraduate degrees online after they have studied for 2 years in a university, a community college, or a technical college. It allows students in vocationally oriented degree programs to develop the skills needed for available jobs in their local communities. It provides local advising, career counseling services, utilizing the existing network of campuses in our system, and most importantly, it reduces cost of attendance and student debt by maintaining affordable tuition. In the 2 years since its inception in 2013, more than 1,000 students have enrolled in these degree programs, and 200 of them have already graduated. Our On Your Time initiative utilizes the full calendar to give our students more flexibility in academic planning to facilitate timely graduation. It expands the traditional summer programs to a full semester. It allows students to take advantage of work, service, or other opportunities year-round without the risk of extending their time to graduation and their debt. And it creates summer immersion institutes in high-demand areas for students who want to enhance their marketable job skills in a short period of time. The added flexibility allows for over 50% of the bachelor's degrees offered by the University of South Carolina to be completed on an accelerated time frame, consistent with the preference of over 40% of our freshman and sophomore students who would like the opportunity to complete their baccalaureate degree in less than 4 years. Additional examples, our USC Connect program and Gamecock Guarantee programs are described in detail in the written testimony. We pledge to continue developing such ideas, as I know many of our colleagues also do across the country, but we also need your help. We need your help in continuing to support need-based federal funding for our students. We need your help in continuing to provide federal support for academic research so that we close the innovation deficit. And finally, we do need your help in controlling a growing regulatory framework put in place, in most cases with good intentions, in order to control a few bad actors, although the tools are already in place to do so. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to join you today. And on behalf of our students, their families, and our faculty and staff members, I thank you for your commitment to and support of higher education, and in particular the public higher education sector that I come from. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, Dr. Michel, please recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Scott, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to address the state of the economy and the prospects for America's workers. My testimony today will focus on the key economic challenge we face, which is middle-income stagnation. It is just common sense that wage trends lay at the heart of this issue. After all, middle-income families are essentially those who rely almost entirely on their jobs for what they get to spend. They don't have financial assets that produce income. This is also true for low-income households. So lifting people out of poverty and strengthening the middle class is essentially about wage growth. Let me offer a few facts to start the discussion. First, as Mr. Scott noted, the top 1% saw their wages rise by 138% since 1979, while the bottom 90% saw a rise of just 15%, most of that in the late 1990s. Secondly, we've seen substantial productivity growth since 1973, up 74%, but a typical worker's pay only rose 9%. So this is a very long-term issue, and it is not about generating productivity. It is about making sure that productivity is shared by the vast majority. Last, it's also worth noting that wages have been stagnant for the last 10 years, in the last recovery as well as this one, for both blue-collar and white-collar workers, for both college graduates and high school-educated workers. Some people think that these problems stem from a so-called skills mismatch, that somehow those without a college degree just don't have the skills needed for today's economy. That is simply not true. Evidence from many studies shows that since 2000, the jobs that we've been creating have been concentrated at the very low end. The jobs in the upper half of the wage scale, which require the most education, have not expanded their share of employment whatsoever. In fact, we see college wages stagnant, new graduates from colleges taking jobs with fewer wages and fewer benefits. So what are some of the things that can be done by this committee to actually address this problem? First, you should raise the minimum wage to $12.50 by 2020, which will benefit a third of the workforce directly and indirectly. Second, we need to update the overtime rules. It used to be that 2/3 of salaried workers qualified for overtime. Now it's only 11%. Hopefully the administration will raise the threshold and add 6 million people that protection. Third, we need to strengthen the rights to collective bargaining. The biggest shock to wages over the last 30 years has been the erosion of collective bargaining, which has hurt the wages of those who used to benefit from collective bargaining, but even more so those who benefited, non-union workers, whose wages were lifted by their employers who were fearful that they would leave the job and take a better paying job. Fourth, we need to regularize undocumented workers. These workers are exploited. They earn lower wages. Regularizing them will raise their wages and also lift the wages of those in similar fields of work. Fifth, let's end forced arbitration. Systems where employers force workers to not be able to go to agencies or courts for remedies, for wage and hour violations or discrimination. Sixth, we need to modernize our labor standards. It's not enough to just protect the New Deal standards. We need to bring new standards to allow families to mesh work and family. We need paid sick leave, paid family leave, and standards like that. Seventh, we need to close race and gender inequities. Many of the policies I've discussed will do that, but we also need consistent, strong enforcement of anti-discrimination laws. Eighth, we need fair contracting like what the President has proposed. These new rules will help reduce wage theft, obtain greater racial and gender equity, and generally support wage growth. Last, we need to tackle misclassification, wage theft, and protect prevailing wages. These are all things that will help lift wages. What won't help is tax cuts. Tax cuts won't generate economic growth. The growth they will benefit will not necessarily trickle down to wages. The taxes paid by a middle-class family, according to CBO, used to be 18% in 1979, is now down to 11%. That is not the problem we have faced. Last, it's not so much getting more people to go to college. It's about making sure that those people with whatever degree they have see rising wages. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Now, Mr. Greenblatt, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Klein, Ranking Member Scott, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and for holding this hearing today. My name is Drew Greenblatt, and I'm the president and owner of Marlin Steel. I'm currently on the executive committee of the National Association of Manufacturers and serve as the vice chair of its small and medium manufacturers group. Here are some facts about U.S. manufacturing. Conventional wisdom is wrong. The United States is the world's largest manufacturing economy. We produce 21% of the global manufactured products created. More than 12 million Americans, that's 9% of our workforce, are employed directly in manufacturing. That's more, it's almost the population of Minnesota and Virginia combined. The American manufacturing renaissance is real. As president of Marlin Steel, I'm optimistic about the future, and I know many of my colleagues on the board of directors of the National Association of Manufacturers share my view. We're bullish. At Marlin Steel, we're expanding our factory floor space 53%. We'll be investing in new infrastructure, which will allow my factory to draw 7 times more power. We're bringing in a huge copper wire so we can grow more technology, more robots, more automation in our factory. 7 times more power. This will give us, these robots, this automation will give us new technology so we can hire more additional high-priced talent to meet our new demand. Marlin Steel employs 30 people, and we make custom wire material handling baskets, wire forms, sheet metal fabrications like this one right here. And we service the markets of automotive, pharmaceutical, medical, all kinds of industrial markets. 6 of our employees are degreed mechanical engineers, and their innovations are what make our products first class. They create our secret sauce. That's what differentiates us so we're not a commodity player. They're so talented, we actually export to 37 countries, including my favorite country to export to, China. I'm really proud of that. We import nothing, and we make everything in Baltimore City, Maryland. I'm proud of my team. They're exceptional and by far my most important asset. I'm also very proud to say we've gone more than 2,243 days without a safety incident. My optimism for the future of manufacturing generally, and Marlin Steel in particular, is tempered, however, due to government policies that are hindering our dynamic growth. In order for us to succeed, manufacturers need our elected leaders to choose policies that make our nation a better place to invest, to innovate, to headquarter, and from which to export. They must choose policies that strengthen our workforce so it meets the need of manufacturing in the 21st century. Manufacturers seek a coherent strategy from policymakers in Washington that focus on ways we can ensure the future success of manufacturing in our country. We need policies that are grounded in free enterprise, in competitiveness, individual liberty, equal opportunity. To achieve this target, the National Association of Manufacturers has established 4 goals. We believe they're achievable, and if we can maintain these, we will strengthen our country's economic advantage. Number 1, the United States will be the best place in the world to manufacture and attract foreign direct investment. Number 2, manufacturers in the United States will be the world's leading innovators. Number 3, the United States will expand access to global markets. We need to sell to more countries. 95% of the world's consumers live overseas. Number 4, manufacturers in the United States will have access to the workforce that the 21st century economy demands. The NAM growth agenda can bring our country together and put more people to work, ensuring the United States always remains the brightest beacon of hope, optimism, and opportunity in the world. The agenda before the Education and Workforce Committee is an essential part of achieving these goals. Whether the work you're doing is focused on workforce, training, healthcare, immigration, labor, employment, please know you are shaping the trajectory of manufacturing. Manufacturers can compete globally, but we shouldn't have to compete as an economic priority here at home. Thank you very much for this opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greenblatt. Thank you very much to all the witnesses. This may be the best I've ever seen. 4 witnesses stick to the 5-minute clock. I don't know whether we've got brighter lights or what, but thank you very much. We're going to move now to questions from the members. And again, I would remind all the members to limit your questions and the expected answer time to 5 minutes. The old filibuster for 4 minutes and 52 seconds and ask a question. I'm sorry, we'll be gaveling that down. Okay, we'll put myself on the clock as well. I'd like to start with Governor Pence. I may end with Governor Pence, too. I'm not sure as we go here. I didn't realize this. I don't know how I missed it, and I'm not surprised, but I've got a note here that says, on your first day as governor, you placed a moratorium on and began a review of state-level regulations. And then in November of 2014, Forbes magazine identified Indiana as having one of the best regulatory environments in the country for starting a business and creating jobs. There's a little footnote I'm looking at here. It says Indiana was ranked number 3 in 2014. That's probably a misprint. I think it was probably, well, it couldn't have been 1 because then you got the whole Minnesota. Okay. But, Governor, as you know, here in Washington, we are continuing the flood of regulations. The Unified Agenda is just out, and everybody understands that the administration is required twice a year to tell all of us what major regulations in the pipeline, and there's a bunch of them. So could you please discuss your concerns regarding the administration's regulatory, what I think is excess, and to the extent to which it impedes economic expansion, job creation in Indiana?
Well, thank you for the question, Chairman. And I have long believed that regulation is another form of taxation. The government can, in the form of taxation, can appropriate money from an individual or a business in the form of direct taxation, or they can tell the business or the enterprise how to spend that money. And in the same sense, there's a loss of control of those resources. So after I was elected governor, we focused both on tax reduction in Indiana and reform, as well as regulatory reform. And I appreciate the chairman's acknowledgement. We did sign a moratorium on any new state regulations and began the process of a full-scale look back at Indiana's regulatory policies with a real focus on ensuring that we're protecting the health and well-being and safety of Hoosier workers and ensuring that environmental compliance takes place, but with an eye toward trying to cut red tape on businesses. I'm also, although you left it out, we also did pass the largest state tax cut in Indiana history in my first year. But I think a combination of these things is why Indiana's economy is growing, why we've added 100,000 net new jobs, why Indiana led the nation last year in manufacturing jobs created, and why in our state, as there is in the country, there is a renaissance in manufacturing, and I would say particularly in the heartland that you and I call home, Mr. Chairman. But I think it does proceed out of a combination of common sense regulatory policies, and I strongly urge members of this committee, whether it be regulatory policies coming out of the EPA pressing down on the cost of energy that is so vitally important in states like Indiana, or whether it be a broad range of other regulatory policies that Washington, D.C. on an increasing basis begin to see regulation simply as a form of taxation. And as we think about lessening the taxation burden, as there is talk in this city this year about tax reform to help get this economy growing even further, that we would also think very seriously about the kind of regulatory reform that's helping Indiana grow our economy. But that, I also believe, combined with really forward thinking about education, and particularly about workforce education. The truth of the matter is, in Indiana, we do have a skills gap. Even when unemployment in Indiana was over 8%, I would more often than not visit businesses that in our state that would say, we have jobs available, we just can't find people with the background, the training, the industry recognized certification to be able to fill those jobs. And that's why, in addition to tax reform and relief, in addition to regulatory relief, in Indiana we've really been focusing on redoubling our efforts to make career and vocational education a priority in every high school. I look forward in the course of the hearing to unpacking that further, but I think we're doing it differently in Indiana, and I think it accounts for our growth.
Thank you, Governor, and I'm sure that we're going to get at some of those things. I was going to talk to you about the Western Governors University and your relationship there, but I can see my time is just about to expire. I did want to point out that Dr. Amaritas talked about a growing regulatory framework as well. It's affecting higher education. So I yield back and recognize Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Pence, you indicated that each high school would have a career and vocational education component to it. Did I understand that right?
Mr. Scott, in Indiana, what we've made as our goal is to make career, I call it career and vocational education. People in education know it better as career technical education. But my aim is to make career and technical education a priority in every high school. And we're seeking to change the funding formula in Indiana to build on that commitment and encourage not only public resources but private resources to make that a reality.
Now, some are concerned that this might be at the expense of academics. Would that be in addition to the academic standard and not at the expense of academics?
Well, it's really a great question and a more important point. Our aim is to make sure that every student who goes to school in Indiana graduates with that, what we call our Core 40 college preparatory degree. We're talking about those electives that are on top of that and making those more regionally relevant, allowing young people, in addition to being ready to go to college, giving them a chance to get the industry training, technical background, even industry certifications in the event that they want to go to work right after high school as opposed to going on to some post-secondary right away.
And the important point is that it is not at the expense of academics, so you're not setting people aside to, when I was growing up, shop or something like that, and you'd graduate without the academic background and be burdened because of that for the rest of your life. You would make sure they have the full academics, and in addition to that, have job training where they can actually go and get a job.
Well, that's exactly right, but I would commend to the attention of all the members of the committee a good deep dive into career technical education today. You know, Indiana, we're very strong in manufacturing, but also in life sciences, in logistics, in agriculture, and in high tech. And we're talking about career training pathways in our high schools that would give people the kind of training to enter entry-level positions in healthcare, entry-level positions in advanced manufacturing, and in agriculture. And so the idea here is much broader. You know, back in the day when I was going to high school, you and I are about the same age. You know, we had industrial arts. I would tell you, career technical education today, where it's done right, is much broader, much more diverse, and opens up opportunities for good paying jobs for young people as they step right out of high school.
Thank you. Dr. Amarides, you indicated, you mentioned research. Can you tell me what's happened to your research budget, and what has that done to the people who are doing the research?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Our research budget, both from federal and private sources, and the small percentage that come from the state of South Carolina, has been stable in the last few years. So we didn't have significant consequences for people who are involved. The importance of the research budget, not only for the university but also for the surrounding area, is very significant because a lot of people are getting paid to do the work there. They are living within the local economy. They rent houses, they buy cars, they buy groceries, and so on. Other institutions have seen significant decreases. Fortunately, at the University of South Carolina, they have been stable.
You mentioned also in your prepared remarks the need to make sure that financial aid was available to all students. What happens when that financial aid is not there?
You made very well the point in your opening remarks that one of the issues that we are facing is the issue of debt. Some students are able to borrow money, and that increases when the financial aid is not there, and statistics show that the student debt specifically increases when they don't graduate in time, in years 5 and 6, because the aid is not available, or because they cannot maintain their grades. Some people, quite frankly, drop out of school, and that means that they lose a significant investment that they have made. So when the aid is not there, it's bad news for the student, no matter what, whether they drop out of school or whether they increase the debt.
Thank you. Mr. Greenblatt, you mentioned immigration reform. Did I understand from your comments, your testimony, that you support comprehensive immigration reform, and what can you say what that would do to the economy?
Immigration reform is extremely important for our nation. We need more great talent to come into our country so that they can, chemists, engineers, we need people that are going to help run our factories, come up with great innovations, create companies. The nation prospers with our immigrants.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Dr. Fox, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses today. I didn't know I'd get a chance to make this great commercial today about regulations, but there's a terrific bill on the floor today called the Unfunded Mandates Information and Transparency Act, H.R. 50, which deals with improvements in UMRA, which was passed in 1995, that talks about the need for our having more transparency and regulations. And I want to commend it to all of you to look at and to encourage your senators when the bill passes the House today, and I hope that it will pass the House today. I particularly want to thank Governor Pence for being here. And Governor Pence, I'm sorry to have to do this to you, but I have to give you my comments on using the word training, because nobody comes into this group and talks about that word without hearing from me. The only thing I remember from my graduate work, getting my doctorate, 7 years worth, is that you train dogs and you educate people. And I believe that if we want to enhance our attitudes toward career and technical education, is that we use that phrase education and the phrase workforce development. So I would urge us to think about that. And I think that my colleague, Mr. Scott, talking about things being at the expense of academics, if we do education right, whether it's called career and vocational education or it's four-year college education, we're not going to do anything at the expense of what we think of as academics. Because when I talk to employers and all the research I see is people want folks who can read, write, and compute. That's the basis of academics. So thank you for letting me make those comments. I'd like to ask Governor Pence, what other steps are you taking in Indiana to promote college affordability, including cutting costs on college campuses? How are these efforts working, and how have they helped curtail tuition increases? Because this is a big issue for this committee.
It is. Well, Congresswoman, thank you. Thank you for your strong views. I'm accustomed to them with you for many years, and your candor. But let me agree strongly with what you said, and on your first point. I like to say to people, I'm not talking about a plan A and a plan B. In many ways, since the time that you and I finished high school, we saw career education migrate on to post-secondary institutions. I'm talking about two plan A's in our schools. I'm talking about making sure that every student has the opportunity to get that foundational course if they're ready to go off to college, but also to have the opportunity to get the kind of education if they want to be prepared to begin on their own pathway of success in their career. But I agree with you very strongly. A lot of this, for me, because I know there's talk of late, and there may be today, about community college funding. I think what's fresh about what Indiana's doing is we want to make career and technical education a priority in every high school. We want our high schools to work for all of our kids, regardless of where they want to start in life. But I agree with you that it's all about education. It is all about academics. And when you look at what career technical education is today, opening up doorways of careers in life sciences and careers far beyond the traditional areas that people think about. You couldn't be more right, and Indiana intends to make that a reality. College affordability has been a real focus of ours. I will tell you that from the outset of our administration, we've been focused on requiring publicly supported colleges and universities in Indiana to be more effective partners with Hoosier families, particularly in the area of on-time completion. We've seen universities like Purdue University that has frozen tuition for students. But what I can tell you as someone that's got two kids still in college and one who has bills still associated with college, all I know for sure is 4 years costs less than 5 years, 3 years costs less than 4 years. And we're demanding in Indiana that our universities and publicly supported institutions provide degree mapping to students, that are working students consistently toward the objective of finishing on time with the aim toward lessening the burden that would be placed on them in the form of student loans. I also will tell you that we're very proud in Indiana of our financial aid programs that are available, particularly the 21st Scholars program that's been in place, and be happy to talk about that.
Governor, the gentlelady's time has expired. The filibuster trick worked for her. Ms. Fudge, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Just for the record, let me just suggest that historically, the concept of states' rights has never been very beneficial to poor people or people of color, so I would oppose just giving willy-nilly money to the states for education or for any other thing. And secondly, as it relates to accountability, there may in fact be too much paperwork. I don't know, but I do know that there should be certainly some accountability for government and taxpayers' money. And with that, let me just start my questioning with Mr. Michel. Mr. Michel, you wrote a paper called Wage Stagnation in 9 Charts. And you indicate that wage stagnation has not been created by economic trends, but rather by policy. Could you tell me what those policies are?
Thank you very much for the question. Oh, thank you very much. Well, the policies of omission and commission, policies that I believe have been taken on behalf of those with the most income, power, and wealth in our economy. So first and foremost, we've had excessive unemployment for 30 years. We have people today calling for raising interest rates when, in fact, that would slow the recovery. We have policies which have blocked the ability of laws to be modernized to facilitate people's access to collective bargaining. We have not kept the minimum wage value up. It fell remarkably in the 1980s and still is 25% lower than what it was in 1968, when the productivity of the economy was half of what it is right now. We have trade policies which, in fact, have worked to lower people's wages and erode jobs. Let me tell you some policies that have not been responsible. We hear a lot about regulation and taxes. You might not be surprised to know that we have an economy which has the highest profits in 4 decades and the highest after-tax profits in 4 decades. It's hard for me to see that the problem is that somehow business is not being able to make enough money. The question is, when they make that money, and more power to them, what are the policies that we are going to have that are going to make sure that as we have that kind of prosperity, it translates for everybody?
Thank you very much. Dr. Amaritis, you talked about the rising cost of a college education being passed to students and their families through increased tuition. Can you please elaborate for me the importance of federal funding in higher education, particularly the Pell Grant program and the need to restore year-round Pell Grants?
Thank you for the question. Let me clarify that a fraction of the cost has been passed to the students because the universities have also absorbed a significant fraction of the cost by increased efficiencies and by cuts that we had to implement, and I'm talking about the public universities that I know much better. The Pell Grants are extremely important for students that come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. Without them, they don't stand a chance of coming to college. When we are talking about graduating on time, avoiding debt accumulation, it is important to give to these students the flexibility that they need in order to succeed in this endeavor. And therefore, summer support for them is critical. This is exactly what we are doing in South Carolina with a year-round program, trying to give them opportunities to work during parts of the year and come back during the summer to school in order to be able to graduate on time. And the state of South Carolina, to its credit, the General Assembly and the governor has supported us in taking the state scholarship program and extending it for the summer as well. So I think it's very critical. The Pell Grants are very critical for a large number of our students, especially in a poor state like South Carolina, and year-round support for these students will accelerate their graduation rates on time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Mr. Walberg, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Governor, it's great to see you here. And as one who faithfully guards your northeast border and remains challenged with how to compete as a state, Michigan with Indiana, with some of the great things that you're doing, I believe your values, your moral clarity lead to a lot of great things for your citizens. And thank you, because that competition is good for Michigan to have as well. I probably shouldn't go here. I'd love to talk further about career education. But I would give you reinforcements for Dr. Fox. King Solomon said, train up a child in the way they should go. So there is training there, but I also don't have the courage, but some wisdom to not go after Ms. Fox. So
I'll leave you alone on that, Congressman.
I'm going to use the word education today. I do want to talk about something a little different from the career education. Today, 1 out of every 3 workers needs a state-approved license, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. It's amazing the President, in his most recent budget, is also talking of some of the concerns addressed there. The report highlighted that state-based occupational licensure are a powerful drag on employment and the economy because they act as barriers into job markets that otherwise would be accessible to individuals with low skills, little experience and education, or entrepreneurs with limited capital. As governor, you've explored Indiana's licensure policies. I guess I'd ask that as a question. Have you explored, and to what level have you explored licensure policies and whether reforms are needed in your state and significantly other states as well to watch and guard against those impediments to jobs and employment?
Well, thank you, Congressman. And I would tell you it's been an issue of our administration from the outset. We are in our second, what we call long session of our General Assembly. Our budget session happens every 2 years, but in my first long session 2 years ago, we proffered legislation that would reform our licensing process. We continue to work in that category. I can appreciate two aspects of this. Number one is I do believe that, and that statistic speaks for itself, that 1 in 3 require some licensing.
Used to be 1 in 20.
And I think we need to think very, very carefully as a state, and I encourage national policy leaders to think about this as a nation, about when licensing, which presumably exists for the purpose of protecting the public, identifying men and women who have the background and the experience to be in the occupation that they're in, that when that in fact becomes a barrier to entry for people into a particular profession. And in the state of Indiana, we've taken up that issue. We're in consultation with our General Assembly in this session on it as well. But I stipulate that your point that while I think in many professions licensing can be of great service to the public so that people can know and understand, I do find myself more drawn to the principle of associations and private associations having the ability to certify and recognize in some cases people within their profession that they recognize. That would serve the public interest without adding another layer of bureaucracy or additional barriers to entry. But it's an issue we're working on. I would say it's a work in progress in Indiana, but it's very much on our radar screen.
I appreciate that. Mr. Greenblatt, as a former steel worker myself and a son of a machinist tool and die maker, I identify with your concerns of being a manufacturer that's going forward aggressively, that's achieving, but now you need help. Let me ask you this question. How do we raise the profile and respect of vocational skills education so that it is seen as academic as well as vocational?
Dollars, money. The average American manufacturing worker makes over 70 grand a year. Over 95% of us pay health insurance. We have generous vacation, 401k plans in general.
How do we communicate that better then, so that people understand that?
The gentleman's time has expired. Yeah, I know you were trying to do that, Mr. Sablon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I yield my 5 minutes to Mr. Polis.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Sablon. Question for Dr. Michel. You mentioned, of course, the 74% rise in productivity. That's great news, right? I mean, we love productivity go up. Now, there's different stakeholders, and what it sounds like is a disproportionate share of that has gone to stakeholders other than workers. And so I want to focus in on that a little bit. There's management. There are shareholders. Sometimes they get productivity gains through dividends or share buybacks. There's corporate reserves. Sometimes the money just sits there. There's consumers. That's a fairly egalitarian way to distribute productivity gains because it's lower prices. I'm wondering if you have any information on who is benefiting disproportionately from these productivity gains. Is it management, shareholders, corporate reserves, consumers, other stakeholders? Clearly, it's not the workers.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Polis. The gains from productivity have accrued extraordinary amount to the top 1%, of wage earners and of income households. That comes
So,
because
so top 1% of wage earners would generally mean management, presumably?
yeah,
Executive management?
Around 40% of the top 1% would be executives and managers. Another biggest chunk are those in the financial sector, which has been a sector which has expanded dramatically over the last 30 years and whose pay relative to everybody else has expanded dramatically over the last 30 years, so that what has fueled the growth of the top 1% of income has primarily been the extraordinary growth of executive pay and in the financial sector. The wages of a typical worker, as I testified, only rose around 9%, even though productivity grew by 74%.
So a disproportionate amount for executive management, the top 1% of wage earners. Also, I'm trying to further read into your comments. It sounds like consumers and perhaps shareholders have also not proportionally benefited from the productivity gains. Would you go so far as to say that?
No, I would say that you know, as I indicated earlier, we see the highest profits in 4 decades. So the productivity that we've reaped has been being paid out in profits. Some of that gets paid out in dividends. We also know the stock market is extraordinarily high. So we have an economy that is unusual in that we have really a lot of excess capacity. Unemployment is too high. We all agree on that. And somehow the businesses are very profitable. The people at the top are doing very well. But nearly everybody else is not seeing much income growth at all.
I would encourage us to look at productivity gains being passed along to consumers as well. That's also very, it's an egalitarianizing influence, and policies that promote consumers as stakeholders should be very important. Want to go to Mr. Greenblatt real quickly. You mentioned health care and Affordable Care Act, and in particular you mentioned 2 taxes that you're worried about with regard to manufacturing, the so-called Cadillac tax and medical device tax. And I just wanted to see, and obviously when you're talking to people who don't support the Affordable Care Act, their answer is simply repeal the Affordable Care Act. I support the Affordable Care Act. However, like many Democrats, I'm happy to have the discussion about different ways of paying for it. So my question to you is, of course, happy to talk about those particular ways of paying for it. Do you have other proposals to replace that revenue if we were to modify or eliminate those particular taxes?
Yeah, just so you know, from our perspective, I've been giving, since I bought the company, I've been giving health insurance to our team. And we have a very generous plan. They're on the same plan I am. My kids have the same plan as my workers. And it's typically gone up 8 to 12% a year. The last 2 years, it's gone up over 50% each year. That's devastating because I can't pass on 50% to my competition. I mean, my competition in China and Canada, they don't have
to be
that.
clear, the Cadillac tax has not, as far as I know, hasn't started yet. So it's not, it can't be, that
Well,
can't be cause of
I'm
that.
just saying our premiums and what our employees are feeling, what Marlin is feeling, and what factories in general are feeling are massive increases over the last 2 years. And it's it makes it more difficult to retain great talent and hire more talent when our costs are going up. The best way to improve the healthcare delivery system in our country is to give us competition. Right now, I am forced to buy from a handful of companies in Maryland State. I'd love to be able to buy from Nebraska or Virginia or whomever has a good plan. Right now, I'm forced to buy from a very small cartel, and that's un-American.
So
you know, I can buy steel from anywhere in the world.
So, I mean,
I happen to buy it from Indiana, the Nucor plant.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Russell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Governor, it's very exciting to hear the types of policies that have been working. I am a small business owner, a small rifle manufacturer, and I have a question for Dr. Michel. Have you run a business or managed a workforce within a business, sir?
Well, in fact, I have 40 employees, and I come from a family where everybody worked in a small business. My father was a small businessman himself and a proud Republican.
Well, that's good to know. And Mr. Greenblatt, when regulations, fees, and taxes are imposed on businesses, Do you think that they absorb that, or do they pass that on to the pricing of their products towards consumers?
Well, two things occur. Number one, you have to raise the prices and you become less competitive and lose the job, or you take it, it's a very challenging thing, and it really hurts American factories.
And so would you say then that as regulation and forced things like we've seen mentioned here in the testimony today, higher minimum wages, overtime, collective bargaining, forced arbitration, modernization of labor standards, if all of those things are imposed on you, which class of people do you think are hurt most by such policies? Upper class, middle class, lower class?
I think that hurts working people the most because we have to be competitive. We're competing with China, Germany, Canada, and the only way to be competitive is to have a nimble workforce that doesn't have workforce rules that can adjust to whatever's happening in the economy.
And when, Mr. Greenblatt, when you see businesses that have surplus, are they generous with that? Do they get involved with the community and outreach, even small businesses such as your own, or is that pocketed as part of the 1%?
Typically, profits are used as the feedstock so that we can weather recessions, so that we could give bonuses to our employees, so we could pay for education for our team. As a matter of fact, at our company, we pay 100% of everybody's college education, associate degree education, or master's degree.
And you had mentioned that 6 of your 30 employees are mechanical engineers, which is very admirable, and it shows your strong productivity with such a small workforce. I'm guessing they're paid higher than minimum wage to attract competitive people to work for you?
Our lowest paid person is paid 3 times more than minimum wage, and they typically rise very quickly. They start off at minimum wage, they start off at like $15 an hour, but as they learn more skills, they grow. Typical manufacturing employees paid over $70,000 a year.
And so you, sir, as a business owner then, if you want to remain competitive, you have to provide competitive wages or you would lose that skilled workforce?
Absolutely. You have to pay very well so that you could retain and attract great talent.
And to you first, sir, and then anyone who would like to answer, what, particularly on manufacturing, what would be the impact of excise taxes where you're taxed just for the privilege of having made something, in addition to the end-of-year business profits and then your personal taxes? Can you explain a little bit about the impact of just the privilege of having made something getting hit with excise taxes on U.S. manufacturing?
These taxes and regulations are very cumulative and they weigh on manufacturing. For example, in my company, we pay over 40% in taxes. I compete with Canadian companies that make similar things that I do. They pay 15% in taxes. We're at a massive disadvantage. If you want to grow American manufacturing jobs in Baltimore City, the best way to do it is to lower the burden so that we can hire more talent, we'll be more price competitive, we'll win more jobs, we'll hire more people, we'll end unemployment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Wilson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member for holding this hearing on this important issue. Since coming to Congress, I have urged Congress to make its priority a jobs-first agenda. When we invest in our people by providing an opportunity to earn a living wage, then they are able to provide for their families and pay taxes. That is how we improve our success as a nation. The President has made remarkable progress over the last 6 years reviving a struggling economy, including 58 consecutive months of private sector job growth. Despite significant economic progress, many families are finding that while they are simply unable to make ends meet. Nearly 11.2 million remain unemployed, millions more are underemployed or have given up looking for work. According to a recent report by the Center for Economic and Policy Research, African Americans who have earned much higher average levels of education over recent decades have lower chances of earning a living wage today than they had 30 years ago. Today, a parent working full-time at minimum wage will simply not earn enough income to cover basic needs like food, clothing, and shelter. It's mathematically impossible. Working families are the backbone of this country. When we give working families the opportunity to earn a well-deserved living wage, paid sick leave, and paid overtime pay, we keep our country moving forward. Thank you for testifying today, Dr. Michel. I wanted to ask you to expand on your comments about sick leave and paid family leave. We know that these are particularly important policies for working families. Would you comment on how many workers today do not have sick leave in this country? Could you also talk about how we in America compare to other countries in regards to modernizing labor protections like sick leave and paid family leave?
Well, thank you very much for your question. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but I think everybody knows that the United States provides less ability to get paid leave, for sick leave, for family leave, than almost any other advanced country and even many developing countries. The people who don't have access are, in fact, those people with, working class jobs. Those who are white collar are more likely to be able to get those. So what we really have is a problem of those with the least not really being able to do what they, to be able to balance work and family. And that keeps women out of jobs. That hurts families. We need to make sure that everybody is able to do that, and it's part of modernizing our standards. Cities and states are starting to do it. We have 3 states that have paid sick leave, and I haven't seen all the businesses go out of business there.
Decrease funding for instruction at the state level and for research at the federal level agency. Can you discuss the importance of federal research funding for your university?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Wilson. It's extremely important for the public research universities to be able to compete. And we're not asking for federal funds to be given to us. We're asking for funds that are available for the universities to compete with new ideas in order to advance science and technology. We have seen what this has done for this country, how this country has been a technological leader for the last few decades, and we need to remember that this was not always the case. It was not the case at the beginning of the 20th century, for example, and we have seen how the universities have contributed to the advancement of technology and science in this country with direct effects on industry and manufacturing eventually. I am concerned, as many are, at the university level, that decreased federal funding for research and development, especially academic research, is creating a deficit with other countries that they have stepped in and they have provided significant research funding, and eventually we'll have to pay the price if we will lose the technological advancement worldwide. I think it is extremely important for my university and for all research universities.
Thank you. Mr. Greenblatt, would comprehensive bipartisan immigration reform help the economy? You know that the Senate has taken up a bipartisan immigration reform bill. Do you think the House should follow suit and take up immigration reform as well?
The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Grothman, you're up.
I want to talk a little bit to Governor Pence. Glad you're here. We heard a comment a little while ago kind of denigrating shop classes. And first of all, I didn't really like it. I mean, on behalf of so many of the people in the state of Wisconsin, I detected a little bit of careerism there, kind of implying that some training is better than others, and I really didn't care for that. But are there jobs available in Indiana? I mean, we always talk about, the number of people who are unemployed, but first of all, Indiana and Wisconsin are the 2 biggest manufacturing states in the country, percentage-wise, so we have something in common.
Indiana's number 1.
Right now, right, goes back and forth. In any event, do you have job openings in Indiana?
Yes, we do, Congressman, most certainly. And we're working every day to close the skills gap with adult workforce initiatives in Indiana. But what we want to do in the Hoosier State that's really new is we want to make sure our high schools work just as well for our kids that want to start their career as our kids that want to start off in college. And that's why we've made it our aim to make career and technical and vocational education a priority in every high school.
Do you have any idea how many jobs are advertised or job openings are? Do you have any anecdotal evidence from your businesses as to whether they could expand if they could find the workers?
I can get you the updated information. Last year in the state of Indiana, we actually added about a little more than 25,000 jobs in the manufacturing sector. We've seen our workforce grow in the last year by more than 50,000 in Indiana. But at 5.8% unemployment, I can assure you, as I travel across the state of Indiana, there are still positions in our state in a broad range of industries, not simply manufacturing, but in life sciences, in healthcare, in insurance, that are going unfilled today because people can't find individuals with the background and the training to fill them. So there are jobs available, and we're trying to close that skills gap every day in Indiana.
Okay, one quick question for Dr. Michel. My experience in Wisconsin is similar to Governor Pence's. I mean, when I go around, I think maybe I don't know if this is the number one, but probably the number one problem for most of my employers is they can't find people to work. You kind of dismiss the skills gap, and I wondered exactly, particularly in manufacturing, who you're talking to that you feel that is not a major problem. And I look at it from both ends. Obviously, I was a state legislator in Madison. I see so many college graduates not getting jobs that you would expect for a college degree. And again and again and again, I find business owners who complain they can't find anybody to work despite this unemployment problem. And it concerned me a little bit somebody in your position kind of was dismissive on the skills gap. I mean, do you get out there and talk to business owners, particularly, say, Mr. Greenblatt next to you, on this idea that the skills gap isn't a major, major cause for concern?
I would draw my conclusions based on two things. One, as an economist, when you hear the idea of a shortage, you would look for evidence that the wages being offered by employers keep on getting ratcheted up and therefore not able to find work, the appropriate workers. What we see across the board, and in just maybe a few occupations, but across the board, we don't see wages rising very much at all. So it's hard to see the employers bidding up. Secondly, I commissioned work by two MIT professors, Paul Osterman and Andrew Weaver. We published their work last year. They did a survey of manufacturers, and they found that nearly 65% of establishments report that they have no vacancies whatsoever, and 76% report they have no long-term vacancies. In other words, jobs which have remained unfilled for 3 months or more. Only 16% responded affirmatively when asked whether they, quote, lack of access to skilled workers is a major obstacle to increased financial success.
I guess you have 1 second left here.
You have 14 seconds.
Well, Mr. Greenblatt.
That's not the experience of most factories. Skills shortage is a huge problem. We have over 600,000 jobs that we could get hired in today. Machinists, welders, it's awful out there. And our experience is that this is holding back our growth. This is holding back employment. When you hire the skilled talent, what happens is then other people need to be hired around them. So we need our school systems to start creating talent so that we could hire these people and get the economy really going again.
The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for testifying today. I'm very glad we're having a hearing about expanding opportunities in America's schools and workplaces. I do join Ranking Member Scott to say that I am disappointed that we aren't having a hearing about the expanded opportunities in America's schools that would come from a good bipartisan reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Today's hearing is just a day after the unveiling of a major rewrite of the ESEA, and apparently just a week before that bill will be marked up and rushed to the floor. And with all due respect, it's truly unfortunate that my colleagues and I and many new members of the committee don't have the opportunity to hear leaders and stakeholders testify about what is a very important reauthorization. We should be listening to experts, having their input inform decisions about the details of the ESEA, especially given the magnitude of the law. Now, clearly, my colleagues and I want to replace No Child Left Behind with provisions that are less rigid and prescriptive, but the process has lacked transparency and the kind of open dialogue that can yield consensus. Hearings show our constituents that we're serious about crafting policies that incorporate new evidence and thoughtful feedback, and the American public deserves an open process, deserves to see their policymakers wrestling with challenging questions. And without transparency and the assurance that many voices will be heard, it's harder for students, families, and educators to have confidence in the process. Now, I know about the ambitious timeline, but something this important deserves a thorough and open process, so I hope that the committee will reconsider and hold hearings on the ESEA reauthorization. And now I want to follow up on the CTE discussion, career and technical education discussion. I'm not going to call it training, even though Mrs. Fox is no longer here. Now, I found over the years that many of these courses have been eliminated either because of budget concerns or because they aren't tested, and the high stakes that are associated with the courses that are tested. And they're very important hands-on learning opportunities. Mr. Greenblatt recognized that. Governor Pence, you did as well. And in my school tours, I've seen things like fabrication labs with CAD software and 3D printing. I've seen girls-only welding class that has a waiting list to get in. And I wanted to especially ask you, Mr. Greenblatt, you talk about innovation and employees who can help drive innovation. Your goal number 2, in fact, manufacturers in the U.S. will be world's leading innovators. So I've spoken with companies like Intel, largest private employer in my district, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, about how do we educate a generation of innovative workers, especially since a lot of these creative opportunities have been cut. So we need skilled workers, but we also need people who can think outside of the box. So how can education support the need for innovative workers, not just good test takers? Mr. Greenblatt, what are your thoughts?
Creativity is critical. When we interview our engineers, we're looking for ones that can think outside the box and not do exactly what they're told. We're not looking for people with just book smarts. The people that do well in our company are the ones that are not just rigid. They're innovative. So we welcome that, and we compensate them and give them bonus checks if they come up with slick ideas. And we welcome and embrace that kind of input, and I think that should be a model that all companies follow.
Terrific. We have a lot of opportunity with ESEA policy to help drive creative education. I'm going to ask Dr. Amaritis if you want to comment briefly on that, but I also want to ask you to talk about, of course, the rising costs of higher education concern many, and you mentioned that, but you also mentioned that your university has modified its financial aid program to support students during the summer. So can you explain how year-round Pell Grants would support the efforts at your university and help to accelerate the time to degree?
I cannot pass the opportunity to add in terms of the question, how do you educate innovators? And Plutarch in the 1st century AD said that the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but it's a fire to be kindled. You light fires one at a time, and you light fires by combining curricular and extracurricular activities, by advising and mentoring students, and by helping them to learn how to think outside of the box. It is not the university that reorganized its scholarship program. It's the state of South Carolina, actually, with full support, bipartisan support from the General Assembly and from the governor's office. And it's extremely important, I believe, in order to give, again, the flexibility to the students to be able to do the things that they need to do to develop these job skills and this innovative spirit and graduate on time. That's why I think Pell Grants for a summer period are important, because it will give the federal component of what we're already providing in the state.
Thank you very much. I see my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Thompson, you recognize.
Thank you, Chairman. Governor, great to see you.
Great to see you, Congressman.
My pleasure. I wanted to really focus on an area of passion of mine, which is career and technical education training. Serving now for a number of terms as co-chair of that caucus, we hosted, and I believe we need a strong partnership, obviously, with our state capitals. You know, a lot of the really necessary work is going to occur there, but we have to show some leadership here as well in Washington with career and technical education. In fact, in October, late October, I hosted a career and technical education hearing at our state capitol in Pennsylvania. It was bipartisan, and we actually had members of the state legislature that joined us. It was rather unique. We had great witnesses. We had a witness from labor union who talked about the hundreds of thousands of jobs that are open and that will be open, that we just cannot find qualified and trained workers. Our employers struggle to be able to fill. And I apologize, I stepped out because I just had a briefing with our trade representative, Michael Froman, as we, working on TTIP and TPP. And in my mind, one of the things that's necessary with trade agreements is we need a robust career and technical education program to assure America's competitiveness with these. We're going to increase trade. We want to make sure that, from a purely selfish perspective, that we're moving more trade, more products, agriculture commodities to other countries. But if we don't have that qualified and trained workforce, we're not going to ultimately be as successful with any of the trade agreements. I think it goes hand in hand. And so I wanted to get your perspective of, because I know that's something that you've been very supportive of, and really just want to ask your perspective in terms of CTE and what do you see as good models? What do we need to do?
Well, first, Congressman, thanks for your leadership in the caucus on this issue and for helping to bring it to a national, such a national focus. I commend you for that. I will tell you, it's our intention that Indiana would be the first state in America to make career and technical education a priority in every high school again. I remember my days in Congress. There aren't too many things that pass unanimously other than naming post offices. But I can tell you that the legislation that we moved to create a statewide career council and then 11 different regional works councils to rethink high school curriculum on a regional basis for career and technical education passed our General Assembly unanimously, 2 different pieces of legislation. And was co-sponsored by the Republican and Democrat leadership of the House and the Senate in Indianapolis. I mean, this is an idea whose time has come. And I would just say to you 2 things that may inform your leadership on this and your thinking on this. Number one is I just urge the Congress. There's so much focus in this area, as you know, on the headlines of late about community college. For decades, we have talked about career education as post-secondary education. Let me say again, in Indiana, where we're innovating is we want to make career and technical education a priority in our high schools again. I'm somebody that believes that all honest work is honorable, and our high schools ought to work just as well for our kids that want to get a job as for our kids that want to immediately go off and get a degree. So that's A. I would just encourage policymakers here in Washington to think of ways to give states greater flexibility to innovate in secondary education. The second thing is I would just encourage you with the word. I think many states are ready to go in this space, that there is a manufacturing renaissance underway, and there is a skills gap. And there's a recognition. I cite our former colleague Mary Fallin, now Governor Mary Fallin, who made this issue her top priority when she served as chairman of the National Governors Association a year ago. And I can tell you in bipartisan gatherings among governors, where just like in Congress, there's the occasional disagreement. There's not much disagreement on this issue. And so I would just urge you on, both in your role in the caucus and here on this committee, to do all you can to empower states with not only greater resources as they're appropriate, but more importantly, greater flexibility and the encouragement to think about making career and vocational education a priority in every high school again. I do believe it can have a transformative effect on the future of our kids, their opportunities, and of course our economy.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. As time has expired, Mr. Pocan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panelists for being here today. I'd like to try to get into two areas, at least if I can, on education and also on productivity, the dichotomy between productivity increases and declining wages. Let me start with education, if I can, and nice to meet you, Governor Pence. Wisconsin is a state like Indiana that's been one of the early adapters to the experiment of taxpayer-funded vouchers. Unfortunately, in Wisconsin, we haven't had very good success in this area. In fact, recently they did a test of the scores of the kids in those taxpayer-funded voucher schools versus the public schools in reading and math, and they are significantly less in some areas in performance in those schools. But one of the other things we found is that a large percent of the people, the kids getting the money to go to those private schools already are attending those private schools. In the last expansion we did in Wisconsin, 79% of the people who got the vouchers were already attending that school. So it wasn't really anything about improving the public schools. And I know that I think there's a study in Indiana that said about 40%, so not as much as 79%, but we're already attending a private school. Can you just share with me a little bit the thought behind how investing, how you improve your public schools by giving the taxpayer dollars to people who are already attending other schools, how that helps to improve public schools?
Well, number one, thank you for the question and the thoughtful nature of your comments. We think Indiana, with all due respect to Wisconsin, we think school choice was kind of born in Indiana. Okay. And what may affect those numbers you're referring to is Indianapolis was actually home to the very first privately funded educational scholarship program in America. Virtually every major city in the country today now has a scholarship program for underprivileged kids. In the early 1990s, we had a local executive by the name of J. Patrick Rooney, now deceased, who privately funded 50% scholarships for disadvantaged kids to attend private schools. And I'd be happy to drill down on that data, but I expect that may have contributed to some of the underlying statistics you referred to. I just simply believe that competition makes everybody better, and that allowing parents to choose to send their child to a different public school, to a different public charter school, or in the case of disadvantaged kids, to allow them, if they so desire, to send their child to a private school, it actually improves educational outcomes overall. I mean, I've been married to a school teacher. She spent half her career in public school, half in a private school, and I really do believe there's nothing that ails our schools in this country that can't be fixed if you give parents more choices and teachers more freedom to choose.
In fact, I can just take off right on that too, because in Wisconsin, one of the questions we've had too is on the accountability. And if I understand it right, in Indiana, the Department of Public Instruction isn't allowed to audit the current program that you have. So how do you measure that, the accountability in those programs? I mean, when we first started ours, we had all kinds of crazy things. We had money going to schools where the person who founded the school said he could read a book simply by placing his hand on the book. We had people buying Cadillacs. In fact, I think I understand there was a church in your area who said they took the money to improve their air conditioners and all these other things. How do we get that accountability on education? When we say we want to have competitiveness, we want to try it as an experiment, but how do we get the accountability on it?
Well, we have a strong accountability system in Indiana, an A to F system that was established a number of years ago, and 4 out of 5 of our voucher students in Indiana attend A or B rated schools in our state. And I do think accountability is important. I'd like to see more flexibility from the federal government on accountability. When I was in the Congress many years ago, I was one of a handful in my party that opposed No Child Left Behind when it came to the floor in 2001, because I believe that education is a state and local function. I would continue to reflect that to my former colleagues and to leaders in both parties. My hope is that Washington will provide resources, not red tape, give states flexibility, because I think Indiana is emblematic of a program where we've expanded innovation, we have strong accountability, and we're seeing educational and, more importantly, student achievement improve as a result.
Mr. Chairman, I saw the yellow light come up a while ago. I'm going to yield back because I know you like that.
I thank the gentleman. You get extra gold stars for that, which are of no value, of course, but you can have them. Mr. Allen.
Yes, sir. Well, I want to thank the panel, too, for being here. And, Governor, thank you for all the efforts that you're making there in Indiana on education. And, of course, one of the things that I've talked to some college presidents the last couple of days, and I know our own governor in Georgia, but the federal government has a habit of making the assumption that the states don't know how to deal with educating our students. And then, of course, the states and the local boards have some conflicts as well. How in the world do we eliminate that? I mean, get everybody on the same page. In other words, the federal government needs to understand its role, the state needs to understand its role, and the local boards need to understand their role. You know, I would prefer to give it to the local boards and have a bottom-up style versus a top-down, one-size-fits-all style. Have you seen any models in your state that, from the local board standpoint up through the state, and models that even the federal government can say, hey, let's leave those folks alone and let them do what they're doing?
Well, we're very proud of our record in Indiana. And the policies, curriculum policies, textbook policies are established at the local level and driven by parents and administrators in local communities, and that is as it should be. But let me strongly agree, Congressman, with your assertion. I think education is a state and local function, and the role of the federal government ought to be only that which may provide resources, catalyze innovation, that are in the broader national interest. But I believe that whether it is standards, whether it is curriculum, whether it's textbooks, that those ought to be decided and those decisions resolved at the state and more preferably the local level. And we've sought to emulate that in Indiana. And I really do believe that as the Congress takes up legislation in this area, that placing real emphasis on giving states additional flexibility to innovate. I mean, we're proud of our record in Indiana. We're proud of our record in traditional K-12 education, public charter schools, our voucher program, now the largest in the country, our focus on expanding and being the first state in America to make career and vocational education a priority in every high school. And frankly, as I talk to colleagues around the country, I have a lot of inquiry about Indiana's education policies, and as the old book says, iron sharpens iron. And I would just encourage the leadership here in the Congress to think about how we can catalyze state-based innovation and reform in education, and then you will see the best ideas identified because you will see student achievement resulting from that. We're seeing that in Indiana. Test scores are up, graduation rates are up, second best improvement in the nation's report card, and I do think that competitive federalism is especially important in this area in the life of our nation today, and I would encourage you to look for ways to restore the flexibility to state and local governments in this area.
You know, my mom and dad were educators, and of course we sat around the kitchen table at night. You know, my dad says, you give me a better student and I'll give you a better education system. And you know, some students are motivated, others aren't. You know, in states, we compete for manufacturers.
Better believe it.
I mean, we compete like crazy for manufacturing jobs. Yet, the number one decision with manufacturers is, do I have a skilled workforce? How are you, I mean, as far as a skilled workforce, Mr. Greenblatt, I want you to comment on this as well. How do we motivate these students to get the kind of education they need to fulfill the jobs of the future with where we're going in manufacturing today?
Well, I think, you know, for me, education always should be, and I didn't know I'd leave today with a Plutarch quote, but I'm glad I did. It was really powerful. For me, education should always be about letting young people discover their God-given abilities and to develop those. And when they find those abilities and passions, everything else about their academic life will get better as well. And that's why we're seeking to make career and technical education a priority in every high school. I'm absolutely confident not only will it result in students graduating with the background and training to be able to get good jobs, but I know it will increase our graduation rates, it will increase their passion for education, and it will kindle a fire in their hearts and minds for a broader future.
Sorry, the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Hinojosa.
I want to join Chairman Klein and Ranking Member Scott in expressing our best wishes to my friend, Congressman Rowe. I will keep his family in our thoughts and prayers and hope that he will soon be able to return to Congress. While our economy has come a long way since the Great Recession starting back in 2008, wages for middle class and working class families have remained stagnant. I was in the Congress in 1998 when we were able to raise the minimum wage. That's 16 years ago. Just take the inflation rate and see what today's rate, minimum wage, is and how it hurts many working families. I'm also concerned that the United States has also failed to provide all students with equitable access to a high-quality education. In my view, this committee must ensure that all Americans, not just the wealthy 1%, are benefiting from our current economy's growth. I want to go to the first question to Dr. Michel. In your testimony, you indicate that in 2012, the top 10% captured 48% of the market income, exacerbating income inequality for millions of Americans. Can you tell us shortly, just briefly, how raising the federal minimum wage, which would improve the lives of Americans and strengthen our economy?
Hey, thank you for the question. The answer is that the minimum wage essentially sets the wage for the bottom fifth of workers. Those workers now earn substantially less than they did in 1968, even though their productivity economy has doubled, and the workers in the bottom fifth have substantially more education than they had back in 1968. So raising their wages will actually improve, obviously, their lives and lives of their children and their ability. They will consume more. It's actually something that will help the economy.
Thank you. Governor Pence, I enjoyed serving with you while you served in Congress, and I'll ask you one or two questions. Last year, you refused an opportunity to receive up to $80 million in federal investment for preschool development grants in early childhood education for Indiana. I believe that would have helped 2,000 children access pre-K. How are you planning to fund your pilot pre-K program that you mentioned?
Well, first, allow me to reiterate that it was a great pleasure to serve with you in the Congress, and it is good to see you again, Congressman.
Thank
you. Let me say, in the last 2 years, as governor of Indiana, I took time to travel across our state and learn about quality pre-K education. And I came to the conclusion that, first, I'll always believe that the best pre-K education is a prosperous family that can provide the enrichment in the home that every child deserves. But over my first year in office, traveling around the state, I became convinced that, that we needed to open doors of opportunity to disadvantaged children in the state of Indiana for quality pre-K education. I took my case to the Indiana General Assembly in the year 2014. Indiana was one of only a handful of states that had made no investment in quality pre-K education. But I went to the legislature. I made it a priority in our administration. I thought it was important that we cross the threshold and we begin to open doors of opportunity to disadvantaged kids. Every child deserves to start school ready to learn, and quality pre-K education that can make up for what's lacking in the enrichment in the home, I believe, would be a great benefit to Hoosier kids.
I'm glad to hear you say
we worked for that, if I may, Congressman. We worked for that. We passed through our legislative process a pilot program, 5 Indiana counties. We actually launched that program last month, and this fall we will have more than 1,000 students in the pilot program, and we're doing it the Indiana way. We're looking at it. We're opening doors for disadvantaged kids. We're studying it. And my aim was to keep faith with the objective of our legislature to simply begin a program with our state dollars, which we'll fully fund in the next 2 years at $10 million per year, and learn from that program and then explore ways that we can expand opportunities to more quality pre-K in the years ahead. That was the basis of our decision with regard to federal funding, and I stand by it.
Thank you, Governor.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. We appreciate your presence here today. Mr. Greenblatt, like yourself, I'm a small business owner. I own 3 independent retail pharmacies, and the last thing I ever want is people telling me how, and particularly the government, about how to run my business, and particularly how much I'm supposed to be paying my employees. Now, like you, I have well-compensated employees, but I also have students that I use. Do you use any students in your business? And
no, we just hire full-time workers.
Okay. In my case, I use students, and if I were to, Dr. Mitchell, if I were to be required to pay them $12.50, I wouldn't be able to use them. Now, what's that going to do to that particular sector if the government does raise the minimum wage to $12.50?
Well, we're talking about $12.50 in 2020, and there's been extensive study of raising the minimum wage across the states, and I don't think it will actually adversely affect the employment of young workers whatsoever. There are provisions in the minimum wage legislation that actually let young workers get paid a little bit less than the minimum wage, but employers rarely even use it. And the reason is they don't want to have people working side by side earning different wages. So I actually think the higher the wage, they will probably have more time for their studies. They'll probably be able to work less, and they'll be able to help their families more.
I mean, the real minimum wage is $0. They won't get hired.
And that's exactly right, and I couldn't agree with you more. And Mr. Greenblatt, if I could expand on this a little bit more. You mentioned the Affordable Care Act and the impact that it's had on your business, and I can attest to the impact it's had on my business as well. Increased premiums, costs that I've had to incur as an employer, and I'm sure that's the same experience that you've had.
It's terrible.
It is. Thank you. Governor Pence, Dr. Amaritas, while I served in the Georgia State Senate, I had the honor and privilege of serving as the chair of higher ed. And one of the concerns that we had in the state of Georgia was increase in number of college graduates and certificate holders, because we recognize the fact that in the coming years, the jobs that are going to be available are going to be available to that particular group. One of our initiatives has been Complete College Georgia, and that is to get people, Dr. Amaritas, as you mentioned earlier, who have some college to go back and to finish their degrees. Have you had any experience in Indiana or South Carolina where you've dealt with this and something that's been successful?
May I, Governor? The program that is in my testimony, Congressman Carter, is exactly about this. Palmetto College, which is a statewide program that we started online, is focusing on degree completion. People who have done 2 years either at a university, a community college, or a technical college, and for reasons that, because life happens, for reasons that they're beyond their control, they are no longer enrolled, they have families, they're parenting, that they're juggling, older parents, they're not able to be present on a campus. We gave them the opportunity to be able to come back online and complete their degrees. It has been a great success for us. The program exists for 2 years. We have enrolled more than 1,000 students. 43 out of the 46 counties in the state of South Carolina are represented in the program, which means that it's widespread throughout the state. 48% of them are members of underrepresented minorities. So there is a need. And I think there are ways that we can do it with low cost, using technology, because these people, you cannot expect them to drop everything and come back to campus for 2 years. And our Palmetto College is a very good example that is receiving national attention along these lines.
Thank you. Governor?
Well, first, let me commend you for the focus on exactly those people in our state who have, as you mentioned, went to college, didn't complete, have credit hours. And our Commission for Higher Education has made special emphasis on reaching those Hoosiers and explaining to them the opportunities that we have, either to return to college, to pursue part-time degrees. But it is a real focus of our administration. I'm also pleased to say that WGU has a very robust presence in the state of Indiana, providing exactly the kind of online education that the professor just described. And just in the last 2 days announced some great graduation rates for adult learners. The ability to take advantage of technology, we think, is a key component to encouraging Hoosiers to go ahead and finish that degree and then be there in that new economy that, as you mentioned, increasingly, as we all know, is going to require post-secondary attainment.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I have an article which I'm going to ask to be admitted to the record. The title of it was published a couple days ago in the Hartford Courant, our largest daily newspaper in the state. The headline is, "Connecticut's hiring hasn't been this good since 1998. Job growth in 2014 was the strongest it's been in Connecticut since 1998, with 26,700 new net jobs." Again, that's a higher number than the entire the 21st century. And I say that not just to boast about my state, which I'm always happy to do. We dominate basketball now, Governor, sorry. Men and women such. But again, this is a state which also has the highest per capita income. And it's also a state which last year raised the minimum wage. Governor Malloy was the first governor in America to lead the fight to raise the minimum wage. It passed. We also passed a paid sick leave law up to 10 days. Again, with an exemption for the mom and pops, but the fact of the matter is that these policies occurred despite all of the catechism that we hear over and over again on the Hill here about, how harmful that would be to growth, and yet we've had the best growth since 1998. And you've already addressed the minimum wage, Professor Michelle. If you could talk about paid sick leave in terms of, the impact it has, aside from having sick people coughing on your food in restaurants, which nobody wants. I mean, what are the benefits in terms of the workforce when those policies are implemented, and how it's not antithetical to growth?
Well, thank you very much for your question. Nice to see you again. I was asked earlier how many people get paid sick leave, and I didn't have the answers. My handy research assistant provided them to me. The top 25% of workers in terms of pay, 84% of them get paid sick leave, but the bottom 25%, only 30% have paid sick leave. So, we have experiences in New Jersey, California, Connecticut, that indicate that doing these things doesn't hurt jobs, doesn't hurt the economy. Obviously, people don't want to be faced with a choice of having to not show up at work or leave someone sick at home. This is something that falls most heavily on women. And so if we really want people to be able to participate in the economy, and just a matter of common decency, I think, is to make sure that people have some kind of minimal benefit like that. May I pause 1 second to say something about manufacturing that we've heard discussion of? I've been involved in manufacturing policy and worked with manufacturing workers for over 30 years. Given what's happened in manufacturing in this country, which I think is very important, why would we think that someone in high school is going to look at a manufacturing job and say, that's something that's going to be there the rest of my working career. I want to get a job there. Given the trade policies we have in this country, given the fact that we don't actually support manufacturing. Second, I've been studying the manufacturing wage premium. Manufacturing does pay better than other jobs, I think, and that's a great thing. But that pay premium has substantially declined over the last 30 years. So in fact, it's not as good an opportunity as it used to. The last thing is we know that employers provide a lot less, I'll call it training, on the job than they used to, but we don't have any surveys. So maybe there's one thing that people across the political spectrum here can agree. We need to have surveys done by BLS that they used to do, which actually ask employers what kind of training do they actually provide on the job, because we've seen that go away.
Right. Thank you. I mean, actually, I would sort of edit that a little bit, because what I would say is that the smart employers actually do engage in that kind of training skill growth for incumbent workers.
Absolutely.
Electric Boat, which has just been awarded the largest shipbuilding contract in American history for the Virginia-class submarine, has a unionized workforce. They are producing submarines under budget, ahead of schedule, consistently, because they approach this as a team, not as us versus them situation. I just want to, before my time's about to run out, I want Mr. Greenblatt to feel good about something here today in terms of my Q&A. There's actually, I think, more receptivity to your comments regarding the excise tax and I think actually Professor Michel and you might have a good conversation on that, but we'll reserve that for another day. And so thank you all for being here today.
Gentleman yields back, and I thank the gentleman, Mr. Bratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question in mind and a statement as a professor that may go on for 30 seconds, so give me 30 before I get to the question. And I'm thankful to Governor Pence for invoking Plutarch. I was waiting for my inroad. I'm reading. Very good. Thank you. Very good. So both of you can weigh back on this. In a policy setting like this, it's a little ironic to note that policy itself did not make the United States of America the greatest country in the world, right? The free market system and our rule of law did that. And so we go back to 1800, modern economic growth takes off. Adam Smith, the invisible hand, James Madison, the Constitution, and you get modern economic growth for the first time in history, right? All the rest of human history made about $500 per year, per capita, right? And so it's interesting in this policy forum that doesn't come up enough. And so I'm glad I heard a little Plutarch and kids' passions and following their dreams in the business world. And it's crucially important and makes all the difference. And so here's the two questions. Do our kids, in any meaningful way, and I taught for 18 years, so I know the answer to this, know what the free market system is? Right? The free market system has to be chosen by your society. We've always had trade. The Greeks had trade. You trade the agora, whatever. But countries have not chosen the free market system. And the most free countries are the most prosperous. That's what we all want. That's what everybody in here wants. And then secondly, more cynically, that's a hard one, right? That might be college level. Do our kids in K-12 know what a business is? So we're doing skills conversations in here, and that's all great, trades and vote. I'm in favor of all that, and I think it's totally bipartisan. I can't imagine how we're not going to do that for the kids. But they're doing this for K-12 for 13 years of their life, and they don't know what a business is, right? At the end of if you asked a kid, what is a business at the end of 12th grade, they might not be able to answer that. And so I don't know if you have, Governor, any ideas of how to get the kids to reveal their passions at an early age so they know that they can use their passions in a vocation that's important to them in a business. And if they don't know that up front, all the skills training may not be for the best end. So I'm throwing that open.
You bet. Well, thank you, Congressman. Thank you for your thoughtful comments, which I'm in strong agreement that the freedom of this country, our market freedom, the character and the faith of the American people explains the extraordinary success of the American experiment. I would tell you, though, that with regard to this issue of career, it's one of the reasons why I like to say career and vocational education as opposed to career and technical, because in Indiana, for instance, one of the things we're doing, when I was in Kokomo, Indiana recently, I visited a high school that's ahead of the curve on what we're doing in this area. And I visited a welding class, and there were some terrific kids there, some of which are headed off to Purdue University to study engineering, and some of which are hoping to be in a welding school in Ohio that's one of the premier in the country. But then the next class I met with was the entrepreneurial class. That class is also part of the CTE curriculum. And the class actually itself changes place. I think it's every month. They spend an entire month, several days a week, in a business, learning the business, and all different financial services and real estate and healthcare, and learning that business, learning how it operates. And the end result of that course is these kids all, and they were just so impressed with all the kids that I met, but they were standing there proudly telling me about the business plan that they were going to be submitting. And here's what they do in Kokomo at the end of this career technical education class. Not only do they have to submit a business plan, but they submit it to local investors. Okay? And with the idea that this may be an idea, a business whose time has come in Howard County, Indiana. So I really would encourage policymakers at this level, when you see Indiana moving boldly in this direction, we're looking to do, I think, in a very real sense, exactly what you're saying, and going well beyond traditional understandings of skills education and really equipping young people. And my criteria is, if someone wants to start their career right after high school, I want them to have the opportunity to get the background, the training, the practical experience, the internship, or the industry-recognized certification to be able to do that. But that I think it's a powerful idea. I think it speaks in a practical level to exactly what you're talking about, and exposing young people to businesses and enterprises, large and small, in their region, I think will go a long way to them understanding the truth of what you said.
The gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses today for being part of this conversation. And Governor Pence, I appreciate your time and being here today. I'm sorry we did not get to serve together, but I am very heartened to hear you talk about the importance of quality early education, and with your focus on career and vocational education, the recognition that it starts with our very youngest learners, which is certainly backed up by educational research. And certainly I've heard from our business leaders around this country and in my state of Massachusetts as a priority. So I wonder if you could expand a little bit. Indiana, as a Category 1 state, was eligible for up to $80 million under the preschool development grant. And I know you said there were some issues maybe with your administration and with the legislature in Indiana. What specifically made them decide to pursue a $10 million state-funded pilot program rather than going for this money?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman, and I can tell already that I would have counted it a privilege to serve with you. Appreciate your courtesy very much. Let me correct, if I can, the record very respectfully. It was not a decision between either or. I pursued the creation of the very first publicly supported pre-K program in the state of Indiana. And we managed to pass a pilot program in the year 2014 that really crossed an important threshold in the state of Indiana, where the people of our state said yes to opening doors of opportunity for disadvantaged kids to be able to have access to quality pre-K. We put $10 million behind that out of excess reserve funds. And in the budget that we just unveiled, we are seeking from the Indiana General Assembly $10 million per year to fully fund that pre-K program. But I would tell you, through the legislative process, of which you may be still relatively new here, but not in your career, I suspect, the General Assembly in Indiana very much wanted to pursue this on a pilot basis, to have us learn 4 urban counties, 1 rural county, to learn about diverse programs, diverse delivery systems, and to internalize those lessons before we made decisions about expanding the program. And my decision about not applying for federal funding was simply born of 2 things. I wanted to keep faith with the spirit of the pilot program that had been created and embraced by our legislature and thereby by the people of Indiana. And secondly, I was very hesitant to expand the program before it was started. That you might notice if you look at Indiana's record on whether it be tax reform, education innovation, or even last week on healthcare reform. We like doing things the Indiana way, which is to say we bring common sense Hoosier principles to bear on challenges, and we craft solutions that work in our communities and in our state. And I very much wanted to keep faith with that. So for me, I'm very proud of the fact that our administration sought and received the very first public funding ever in Indiana for quality pre-K education. We're faithfully implementing that, and this fall we expect to have more than 1,000 disadvantaged kids in pre-K programs around our state, and have already launched the program in counties around our state since January of this year. And I would tell you, in Indiana, my decision ultimately was I did not want, with all due respect to the federal treasury, I did not want to invite federal resources to expand a program before it was even started. We wanted to learn from our experience, learn from our pilot program, but we're going to take those lessons and we're going to look in the future, I can assure you, for ways to expand opportunities to quality pre-K education in Indiana. I think it's right for our kids at the point of the need, and I'm confident that as we learn the lessons about what programs work and in what ways in Indiana, the people of Indiana will be ready and, as they invariably are, be generous in supporting efforts for our most vulnerable kids.
So was the funding itself tied to expansion? Was that the hurdle that you saw? It wouldn't have helped your pilot program in rolling out?
Well, I think ultimately accepting federal funding to expand a program before it was started was premature. And that our aim was to have faithfully implement the pilot program that our General Assembly created. We're in the process of doing that, and I look forward to it being a great success for vulnerable kids, and also a way that we can chart a course for the future.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Messer, you're not going to ask a question of your governor, right?
Yeah, well,
you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say thank you to the witnesses. Thank you for your testimony. And at this stage of the hearing, I thank you for your stamina. You know, I hung around here to learn, and I hung around for the opportunity to highlight a couple of my favorite topics, which is the leadership of our great Governor Pence, and also the importance of manufacturing for the future of America. And so with the governor's permission, I'm going to ask a question first to Mr. Greenblatt and then come back to the governor. And Mr. Greenblatt, we are proud in Indiana to be a place that makes things. I believe that that a key to the future of America is that we remain a place that makes things. I appreciate your work and the work of NAM. You got close to it a couple times in other questions, but I just wanted to ask you almost this straight. As members of Congress sitting here today, and I believe we do have bipartisan support for the desire to make America strong and I mean manufacturing in America strong, what would be the one or two things that we could best do to help you and your business and help the manufacturing industry in America?
One thing would be tax reform. We have a massive disadvantage when we go head-to-head against Canada and Germany and China. We're taxed 15%, I'm sorry, Canadians are taxed 15% and we're taxed 40%. So that would be one topic that's challenging. Another topic that's challenging is the regulations. We have tremendous amount of burdensome regulations. The average American manufacturing employee has this heavy weight of regulations that makes us as a nation less competitive. So we lose jobs against France and Germany and Canada that we shouldn't be losing. And if we could reduce some of these burdensome regulations, reduce our taxes, we could really prosper and grow jobs.
Thank you. And as you highlighted, I mean, I think there's a renaissance in manufacturing happening in America. I see it in Indiana where jobs are coming back from overseas, and we hope to work with you to do more to help make more of that happen. Now, to our Governor Pence, appreciate all of your testimony today, and again, appreciate your friendship. I know one of the things that you and I are both very proud of is the work that's been done in Indiana, so that we truly are a state today that not one child in Indiana has to have their future on a wait list, that parents have now the option to find the school that best fits their child, be that traditional public school choice, public charter schools, virtual schools, and of course, as you talked about just a second ago, the fact that Indiana now has the most robust private school choice program in the country. Could you talk a little bit for the record here about the amazing success of that program and what we're doing to even grow those opportunities further for kids in Indiana?
Well, thank you, Congressman, and let me congratulate you on your election to a leadership position in the House Republican Conference, and also for your efforts to really shine the light on school choice across the country, even in the last week. We're grateful for that and proud of your service. I've long said that there's nothing that ails our schools that can't be fixed by giving parents more choices and teachers more freedom to teach. The agenda that our administration brought forward this year, the aim of which is to have 100,000 more kids in B or better schools by the fall of 2020, is really an all of the above strategy. But choice is a central element of that. As I said to one of your colleagues earlier, I really do believe that the advent of public-to-public school choice, public-to-public charter choice, and of course the largest voucher program in America, which is in the state of Indiana, have resulted in the overall improvement and student achievement that we've seen in the state. The test scores are up, graduation rates are up, the second best improvement in the country in the nation's report card. It's known as the NAEP. I think that's all a result of that. But I would emphasize that for my part, with all due respect to the best intentioned bureaucrat in the world, no one has a better idea about where my kids are going to thrive, or where their imagination and potential is going to be kindled than Karen and I do. And so particularly focusing, as we did in our school choice voucher program, on the ability of parents to choose that school, public charter, or private, that would best serve their needs, will continue to be a lodestar in Indiana.
Thanks for your leadership, Governor.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Adams, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses. Dr. Mitchell, you indicated that improving education attainment was important for all children to have the opportunity to rise up in that income ladder. And I agree with that. I'm a 40-year educator, having completed 40 years at Bennett College in Greensboro. But I believe that education must also be accessible, but it's got to be affordable. And with the increased cost of higher education, making it more difficult for students to complete post-secondary education, it is especially true for low-income and minority students. For example, students at HBCUs, North Carolina has more four-year accredited HBCUs than any other state. It's very, very difficult for these students. They're penalized for what's called Parent Plus loans. Parent Plus loans are basically not a plus; they're minus. But my question is, what do you think we can do to make Parent Plus loans more of a plus than a minus? Secondly, can you talk about the effect of lesser education attainment on wages, especially those for minorities and women? And what would be the educational outlook for students who aren't able to pursue higher education because of financial barriers?
Well, I'll take part of that. I don't know whether you wanted the person from the university to answer the other part. First of all, I want to say I've been to Bennett College. I visited my good friend Julianne Malveaux when she was the president. Welcome to Washington. I think, providing opportunities, and I understand the challenges of the students there and what Julianne had to do to try to assist students to be able to come to Bennett College and to get through with parents most of whom had never gone to college themselves, or working class or poor. It's really essential that we provide as many opportunities as possible to break down all the barriers to community college, because what it really does is give access to jobs, to be able to compete for jobs in the future. So those students will do better than their parents. What it really won't do, I'm afraid to say, is it's not really a recipe for overall wage growth, because what we see is that wages have been flat for college grads, for community college grads, and high school grads. So we can take people and move people up the different groups, but we really need our policies that lift wages for all the different groups in America. Thank you.
So do you agree that, you know, I think I heard some comments about different wages for students and other folks, and knowing and having worked with young people for a long time, I know the responsibilities that they bring with them to school, trying to finance their education, taking care of families, costs them the same thing to buy a loaf of bread as it would anybody else. So, you know, I just wanted to you know, put that out there. But certainly if the gentleman, if the governor would like to speak to this issue, I certainly would love to hear from him. Or Dr. Amber.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Let me first of all mention that in the state just south from you, in the state of South Carolina, the University of South Carolina is very proud of our Gamecock Guarantee Program. Over the last 6 years, we have supported 900 students with family incomes below the poverty level, guaranteeing them full support if they manage to maintain academic standards. What we have seen is that when you take the financial question out of the picture, these students perform better actually than the average student, because they have the desire, they have the drive to succeed in school and to lift themselves out of what have been generational cycles of poverty that they have experienced. I was in front of the House Ways and Means in the state of South Carolina last week, and I asked them for need-based funding. Many of our states have a very good merit-based programs. We need need-based funding. I think it's very important at the state level, and of course the Pell Grants, support the Pell Grants, expand the Pell Grants to the extent that you can at the federal level. There's no question that a degree in higher education is a balance. You can view it as public good or private benefit. And that's what our system reflects. Part of the state and the federal government is paying for the public good part of it, and part of the individual pays for the public benefit, for the private benefit part of it. I think there are creative solutions to the loans in terms of how do you ask them to repay the loan. Should they repay the loan based on their earning ability after they leave college? How do we guarantee that we get the money back? Do we count the money? And there are solutions like this that they have been advanced at the state level and the federal level that I think your committee can bring experts in to testify and talk about.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Desaunier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on the pronunciation. That was great, and I want to thank you.
See my notes here on how to pronounce that.
You passed. And to the ranking member for doing this. So it's really been thrilling. It's funny to come at the end. It reminds me of the Churchill line of everything's already been said, but no, not everyone said it. So, Dr. Amando, I did want to talk to you about public research facilities. I represent much of the East Bay in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have 2 national laboratories. We have the University of California that prides itself as a research facility, as you know. When I go and see them, they tell me about the very exciting public-private partnerships they're doing with the private sector, as you mentioned. But they also lament the fact that we're not investing as much in public research for the government, particularly the federal government. Is that true in your experience as well? And is that a danger, do you think?
I think the availability of funds has decreased. It is true what they're telling you, that the availability of the funds has decreased. And I'm a true believer in public-private partnerships, but it has to be a partnership. We cannot expect for the private sector to do everything for us without us contributing what we can. So I think our colleagues in the Bay Area are giving you the right picture.
I appreciate that. Dr. Michel, you mentioned consumers, and I was like you. My father was a Republican, and I owned small business. I was in the restaurant business. So one of the most important things for the success and opportunity for Americans is customers. So we have, and the speaker mentioned this in our first meeting when we were sworn in, is this sort of perfect storm of not just wage stagnation, but fixed household costs going up. So for somebody in the restaurant business, you'd read the restaurant trade magazines, and disposable income are really important. So who spends money? Wealthy people. When I managed to own a restaurant in San Francisco, there were plenty of wealthy people. You gave them a product they liked, you didn't have to worry about it. When I owned a business in Concord, California, which was much more working class, the kind of regulations that the governor mentioned were more vexing because my consumers didn't have enough disposable income. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I would just say there's two things. One, my analysis of the economy is that we still face a shortfall in aggregate demand, and that's one reason why we have excessive unemployment. That's the aftermath of the financial crisis. And that's why fiscal austerity at the state level and the federal level has actually hurt very much. We've lost 2 or 3 million jobs because of that. But we also have a long-term problem where I think we have growth challenged because of the change in income distribution. I think that's what you're talking about, because the incomes have shifted to those who consume less. And I think moving forward, we will see consumption growth be more challenged than it has in the past. In the past, families have gotten by taking on more debt, by sending more people into the workforce, and perhaps benefiting from a housing market bubble. Those things aren't going to be available going forward. So if we don't actually grow the old-fashioned way where people earn higher wages and spend it from that, we won't be able to grow as well as we could.
Governor Pence, I wanted to commend you on your work on regulation, but my experience is it's making sure the regulation is effective, the ones we have. So my questions are to you. Did you do cost benefits with the legislature so that there are regulations that actually are helpful to the economy? So when you went through that process, did you do that?
That's the policy of the state of Indiana. Our Office of Management and Budget initiated after we declared a moratorium on any new regulation when I became governor 2 years ago, other than that which was mandated by federal law. We did a full-scale look back and have been in the process of doing precisely that, Congressman, as a cost-benefit analysis and determining where we might be able to cut red tape without compromising worker safety, environmental concerns.
So the result of that, there were some regulations. I think all of us agree less regulations better, but there are regulations that are actually effective. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Jeffries, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank Governor Pence and all of the witnesses for your very thoughtful testimony today. Let me start with Mr. Greenblatt. It's my understanding that in your testimony you mentioned that we need solutions, not bromides and bombastic rhetoric. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that in order to move the economy forward, we really need, I think the phrase was collective serious discussion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in terms of the National Association of Manufacturers' position on comprehensive immigration reform, am I correct that it's your view that comprehensive immigration reform would be helpful to our economy moving forward?
We need more talented immigrants coming to our country so that they can, we need to keep all the wonderful people that are graduating, foreigners graduating from our colleges in engineering and doctorate degrees, medical, et cetera. We need those people to stay here and not go back to China or back to India. We need them to stay here and either work at American companies, create innovations here in America, or create companies here in America. We need that entrepreneurial zeal to really supercharge the economy again.
And I assume you would agree with the statement that with respect to moving forward on comprehensive immigration reform, we need less sort of rhetoric and need to move to a place where we can actually accomplish results and enact the type of changes that you believe will be helpful for the economy?
My great-grandmother, Kate, came over from Russia in 1904. It was critical, either that or she would live a very terrible life. I'm so thankful she came here to America. America needs immigrants to thrive and to prosper. They rejuvenate our economy and they grow our system.
Thank you for that. I'm actually privileged to represent more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union than any other member of Congress in the country. in Brighton Beach and other neighborhoods in Brooklyn, and certainly we have benefited, as New York City has benefited from the hard work of these immigrant families. To Dr. Amaritis, you mentioned, I believe, in your testimony that amongst the mix of things important to promoting higher education for our students in a way that would benefit the country is Pell Grants. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And are you aware that in the Republican budget proposed in the last Congress for fiscal year 2015 that the House majority sought to cut $125 billion in Pell Grants over the next 10 years?
I don't follow the legislative issues that closely, but I will take your word for it.
Would you support that type of cut?
I think that any cut to the Pell Grants will put students at risk, and these are the students that need this education more than anybody else.
Thank you. Dr. Michel, as you mentioned, the productivity of the American worker has increased significantly, above 70% since the 1970s. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yet wages have remained relatively stagnant for the middle-class worker during that same time period, correct?
That's correct. The only time they actually rose was in the period of the late 1990s when we had persistent low unemployment.
And so middle-class workers have not been able to benefit from the economic growth generated from their increased productivity, correct?
That's true. I'd even say that even though Indiana is near to nirvana, the workers in Indiana even have seen falling wages. The median hourly wage in Indiana has fallen 6% since 2000. So this has happened across the country.
How do we address this systematic issue to make sure that hardworking Americans, working families, moderate income folks, middle-class Americans throughout this country can actually benefit from the clear increased productivity that has served the country's economy well, but hasn't necessarily inured to the benefit of the workers who have made it actually happen?
That's a great question. I think the first and foremost is we have to actually act as if better quality jobs and higher wages is actually our foremost concern about the economy. We can raise productivity, we can have better growth, but unless we do the things that are needed to actually link higher wages to productivity growth, most people aren't going to benefit. As I said, higher minimum wage, stronger access to collective bargaining, higher labor standards, eliminate wage theft, all those kinds of things are needed.
I would just note that you mentioned consumer demand is one of the problems impacting the American economy, and obviously just like gas prices dropping puts more money in the hands of the American worker, they'll save more and spend more. That benefits everyone. So, too, would an increase in the minimum wage. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I want to thank the witnesses for your stamina. I think was pointing out earlier, really an excellent panel of witnesses. I very much appreciate your testimony and your frank answers to questions. Before I gavel down, I want to turn to Mr. Scott for any closing remarks he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for holding the hearing. We got a lot of really good information. I was particularly impressed with the consensus on vocational education in high school, with the understanding that it does not diminish the academics, but adds to the academics, because we don't want students to leave high school without the fundamental background, an academic background. And with that understanding, there's a lot of consensus that can be achieved. We also found the importance of financial aid to colleges, including research, so that our young people can not only be doing the research, but a lot of college students are not getting jobs if we're not doing the research. And delighted to see a consensus on the need for comprehensive immigration reform. As again, this shows what happens when you have a hearing. We can find a lot of common ground. That is apparently not going to happen on the SEA, and we would hope that we would delay the consideration of that legislation until such time as we can have meaningful hearings to find what common ground there may be. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his comments and for yielding back. I want to again thank the witnesses. I'm trying to think, we're just having a discussion, if we've ever had a hearing where Plutarch came up. I don't think so. So I'm grateful for that. I like Mr. Scott. I love the discussion on CTE. I do hope that we don't get ourselves bound up between whether it's vocational or technical or education or training. we know where we're trying to go with that, and I think there is bipartisan consensus that we ought to be doing that and ought to be doing more of it. And on the, just one final comment on training, I'm sorry that Ms. Fox, like most members, have had to move on to other things. The hour is getting late. I noted to her before that in my 25 years in the Marine Corps, we did a lot of training, and I actually didn't know very many dogs there, but I am now questioning the whole thing. So again, I hope semantics doesn't get us down and we get on to the issue that the Governor has explained so well, and we certainly hope that that program is working in Indiana as we look at it across the country. There being no further business, committee stands adjourned.